When you think of a vampire, do you picture an old, tall man with pale skin, sharp teeth, and pointed ears, brooding in a crumbling castle? Or maybe your vampire was born of a different era, sparkling in the sunlight, impossibly beautiful, with golden or crimson eyes and supernatural speed. But the vampires of folklore were nothing like this. They weren't elegant counts or tragic lovers. They were bloated, ruddy, and foul. Corpses that clawed their way out of the grave with blood still wet on their lips. And it was these creatures, not the aristocrats of fiction, that haunted the villages of Eastern Europe. Welcome to Botanical Echoes, a podcast where we talk about the myth, lore, and history that shaped the way we see plants. I'm Caleb, your host. Before we begin, a quick warning. This episode contains descriptions of bodies being treated in disturbing ways, along with accounts of death, suicide, and murder. Some of the details may be unsettling. If that's not something you're comfortable with, please feel free to skip this episode and join me again in the future. The rise of the vampire did not come from a single place. It sprang up across multiple cultures. The Greek vrikolakas, the Romanian strigoi, the German Nachsaia and Blutstoka, the Romani mulu, and the very root of the word vampire, the Slavic upir. Throughout this episode, I'll use these terms to show how different communities, separated by language and landscape, held strikingly similar beliefs in a creature that crossed the boundaries between life and death. The accounts I am about to tell you have been condensed for clarity, but each comes from historical sources. I encourage you to look them up if you would like to explore the full stories. I'll start with an account known as the Shoemaker of Silesia. It isn't about vampires directly, which I know is a strange way to begin a vampire episode, but it shares many of the same patterns we'll see later. In the year 1591, in the city of Breslau, a wealthy shoemaker took his own life by cutting his throat. His family, ashamed of the suicide, tried to conceal the truth. They told neighbors he died of a stroke, had someone sew the wound tightly, bandage the body so no one could tell what had happened, then arranged for a Christian burial with all the honors of a respected man. Since suicide was seen as a sinful death at the time, this was an important step. But rumors spread. Soon, people claimed to see him again. His ghost appeared in the streets and in the homes of his neighbors, laying in their beds, smothering sleepers, leaving finger marks on their flesh. Fear grew so great that families abandoned their houses at night, gathering together in crowded rooms with candles burning, but still the ghost came and harassed them. After he had been buried for 8 months, the council ordered the grave opened. What they found was not a decayed corpse, but a body swollen and ruddy, as if full of blood. His limbs were flexible, the wound on his neck open and still reddish, most of his flesh strangely fresh, the skin on his feet peeling away, revealing purer, stronger skin. There was no stench to be noticed except for a smell emanating from his cloths that he had been wrapped in. These were not the signs of a man at rest. After these findings, the body was guarded day and night for 20 days as it sat on a coffin stand. Everyone could see him, and many people from neighboring towns traveled to see him, but the hauntings worsened, and his body grew much fuller in flesh. The council then turned to harsher measures. The body was exhumed again, its head severed, its limbs cut apart, its heart removed and burned. The remains were reduced to ash and scattered in running waters. Only then did the ghost vanish and the city was free of its tormentor. The shoemaker's ghost was silenced by fire and ash, but the pattern did not die with him. Over a century later, in the villages of Serbia, the same swollen corpses, the same restless dead would rise again, this time under a new name, vampire. This is the account of Peter Plogojowitz, recorded by the imperial provisor Frumbald of the Gradis district. In 1725, in the Serbian village of Kiselova, a man named Peter Plogojowitz died. He was buried, and for 10 weeks nothing unusual happened. But within a few days, 9 villagers, both young and old, died after a 24-hour illness. On their deathbeds, several swore that Plogojowitz had come to them at night, pressing on their chests, suffocating them. Even his own widow claimed he had returned after death, demanding his shoes, adding more credibility to the sightings. The panic grew so great that the villagers, knowing the signs common of vampires, appealed to the Austrian authorities. With the local priest present, they opened Plogojowitz's grave. What Frumbald found shocked him. He detected a slight odor characteristic of the dead, and his nose had fallen, but the rest of his body was undecayed. His hair, beard, and nails had grown. Much of his skin had peeled away, revealing new, fresh skin beneath, and blood was found in his mouth, as though he had recently fed. After Frumbald and the priest shared what they had witnessed, the villagers, outraged and terrified, wasted no time. With great speed they sharpened stakes and drove them through Plugojowitz's heart. According to the report, a great amount of fresh blood gushed forth from his mouth and ears. His body was then burned to ash. Only after this did the deaths in Kiselova cease. This is one of the first cases where the word vampire appears in an official report. And unlike the Shoemaker of Silesia, here the revenant is not just a ghostly presence, it's a corpse, one that feeds on the living. There is one more report I would like to share. It's an Austrian military medical report, making it one of the most important vampire documents ever written. In 1732, Austrian military surgeons were dispatched to the village of Midveja to investigate reports of vampires killing people by sucking their blood. Their findings were written in a document called the Visum e Repertum, translated as seen and reported, dated January 26. The report begins with the story of Arnold Paole, a high duke who fell off a wagon and broke his neck. Throughout his life, he claimed that near Gosova, in Turkish Serbia, he had been troubled by a vampire, wherefore he ate from the earth of the vampire's grave and smeared himself with the vampire's blood in order to be free of the vexations he suffered. 30 days after his death, villagers said they started to be troubled by Paoli. In fact, 4 people were claimed to be killed by him. In order to end the deaths, they exhumed Paoli 40 days after burial and found that he was quite complete and undecayed, that fresh blood flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, that the shirt, the coverings, and the coffin were completely bloody, that the old nails on his hands and feet, along with the skin, had fallen off and new ones had grown. And since they saw from this that he was a true vampire, they drove a stake through his heart, according to their custom, whereby he gave an audible groan and bled copiously. After these findings, Paoli and all 4 he killed were staked and burned, as those attacked by vampires were destined to become vampires themselves. It was also said that Paoli attacked not only people, but cattle, and those who ate of the flesh of the cattle would also become vampires, so people thought there had to be more. The report goes further, describing how 5 years later, a new wave of death swept the village. 17 people, young and old, died in just 3 months. Some who showed no signs of previous illness died in only 2 or 3 days. The High Duke Jowiza reports that his stepdaughter, by the name of Stanaka, lay down to sleep 15 days ago, fresh and healthy. But at midnight she started up out of her sleep with a terrible cry, fearful and trembling, and complaining that she had been strangled by the son of a high duke, who died 9 weeks earlier. Whereupon she experienced great pain in the chest, and became worse hour by hour, until she died on the 3rd day. The doctors then went to the graveyards, and exhumed the bodies of 13 suspicious graves. What they found was uncanny. One young mother, Stanya, who died in childbirth, and also painted herself with the blood of a vampire, was found with fresh blood in her chest and organs, as healthy as if she were alive. An older woman, Melisa, buried for 90 days, known in life to be thin and frail, was discovered plump and ruddy in death, her body full of liquid blood. Even children, buried for weeks, were found fresh and undecomposed. The villagers insisted these were vampires, and the doctors recorded what they saw. Bodies groaning when staked, blood flowing from the nose and mouth, nails and skin peeling off to reveal new growth beneath. In the end, the corpses were decapitated, burned, and their ashes scattered in the Morova River. This is no local rumor. This was a signed, dated medical report attested by Austrian officers and surgeons that declared vampires were real. From these reports, we see the traits that define the vampire: ruddy complexion, peeling skin, bloated bodies, liquid blood, and flexible limbs. But these were not the only traits vampires were thought to have. They were known to be loners. They didn't try to create an army and take over the human race. They saw their situation as a curse that was placed upon them, something to be ashamed of. Many people witnessed animals coming and going from the graves as suspected vampires, so they were assumed to have the ability to transform into any animal, especially black ones, not just bats. It's not like the animals were trying to dig them up from a shallow grave or anything like that. And it wasn't just in mirrors or pictures they could not be seen. They had the ability to become invisible at will. In fact, certain gypsy groups believed that they could be seen by a twin brother and sister, born on a Saturday, who wore their clothes inside out. The fact they were invisible made it very convenient to blame any strange occurrences that were happening around town on these vampires. So what behaviors were attributed to these creatures? What were they accused of doing? We already know vampires had been accused of general blood-sucking and livestock eating, with a split tongue that pierced the body, by the way, not fangs. We see these things happen in early accounts. But is that all? In all honesty, pretty much. They were believed to dig into nearby graves and eat the flesh of other corpses, jumping up and down and throwing rocks on people's roofs, looting houses, general petty mischief. But without ever catching them in the act, none of this could be confirmed, except maybe those occasional hauntings. Hardly the world-dominating villains of modern fiction. So then what caused people to become vampires? Suspicion often began before death. People believed certain signs in life marked someone destined to become a vampire. Some of the most common reasons among adults are doing things considered a sin in that time: alcoholism, suicide, robbery. Generally, anything seen as bad would make you a vampire. Sometimes even being of a different faith may deem you to the fate of the undead. In children, there was a different set of reasons. Being born with teeth, lack of cartilage in the nose, hair down the front or back, a tail-like extension from the spine, even a red caul, red birthmark, or amniotic membrane covering the head might be enough to justify becoming a vampire, as anything red is commonly related to vampires. In other words, vampirism was often a way of explaining the unexplainable: why someone died suddenly, why a child was born different, why a neighbor lived outside the accepted faith. If these were the signs of a vampire, then the question became, how do you stop one before it rises? People would then turn to apotropaics, a way of turning evil away. One common practice was to place objects with the corpse, perhaps to satisfy it or keep it occupied. In Greece, a bolus, or coin, would be placed in the corpse's mouth. Some believed this was for their soul to pay its way across the river Styx, while others believed it was a charm meant to keep evil spirits from entering the body. Sometimes dirt or sod was placed in their mouth, believing it would keep them from chewing. Many corpses would be buried face down. That way, the vampire would get confused and dig downward or bite into a chunk of dirt. Candles would often be placed with corpses, helping them to find their way after death. In eastern Serbia, hawthorn stakes were driven into the ground above the graves to prevent them from ever becoming a vampire. A very unique way to keep vampires away was to keep them busy. Vampires were believed to be very compulsive among certain communities. Using this knowledge to their advantage, villagers would throw seeds all around the graves or toss nets into their coffins. The seeds, mustard, millet, but usually poppy, served two purposes. One, it would make the vampire sleepy due to their narcotic effects. And two, the vampire would eat the seeds and collect them, but could only do so at the rate of one seed per year. This was believed to keep the vampires busy for centuries, counting and collecting every seed. The nets also served two purposes. Some communities felt the vampire would wake up and untie only one knot, then fall back asleep. Other communities believed that the net itself would be able to hold the vampire back. Either way, counting seeds and untying knots sounds tedious and apparently very exhausting to only have the energy to do once a year. These measures were not the only ones that could be taken. Many could be done at home, the use of garlic being one of the most well known. It was believed that strong smelling substances could counteract other strong smelling substances. So if the smell of death was strong, but your garlic smelled stronger, death and vampires would leave you alone. Garlic cloves would be worn around your neck, hung around your home, or rubbed on door frames. It wasn't just pungent, it was also long associated with healing and vitality. Vampires were also well known to dislike iron or sharp objects. People would place them around their house, most often underneath their pillows to ward them off. Holy water, crosses, and prayer was used to offer spiritual protections as well. When prevention failed and the dead still walked, communities had to take harsher action, and the evidence is still in the ground. Archaeologists have uncovered burials across Europe that show how people tried to keep the dead from rising. In 17th century Poland, skeletons were found with iron sickles laid across their throats or abdomens. If the corpse tried to rise, the blade would cut into them, decapitating or disemboweling them before they could escape. Other graves reveal stones or bricks forced into their mouths, meant to stop the dead from chewing or feeding. Some bodies were pinned down with heavy rocks or staked through the torso with iron rods. In a few cases, the head was severed and placed between the legs, ensuring the body could never reassemble. There is a story in which a man must exhume his mother's body and decapitate her, placing her head at her feet, as she has been accused of being the vampire that killed his whole family. This sad story shows how heart-wrenching a lot of these accounts are, and what people had to endure during these times in order to ensure their and their family's safety. The head and mouth were often the focus. Spikes were driven through tongues or thorny plants wrapped around lips. If that failed, the body might be dismembered, organs removed, and finally burned to ash. Sometimes, as in the Shoemaker of Silesia, the ashes were scattered in water, since souls were believed unable to cross water and be trapped within it. Burning was considered the surest way to end a vampire. But why wasn't it always used? The answer lies in the difficulty of cremation before modern technology. It is very laborious and costly to burn a body. Today we have chambers that get anywhere between 1,400 and 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or between 760 and 1,093 degrees Celsius. Back then, getting temperatures to reach those numbers through log piles alone was not an easy thing to achieve. With the body's water content, sometimes it would take days on end for the body to be burned, and the amount of resources needed would make many find any other way possible to deal with vampires. What these villagers saw had to be proof of vampirism. If I witnessed these same things without modern scientific understanding, I also would have thought something was terribly wrong, especially when other bodies decomposed so quickly. Different regions developed their own explanations. In South Slavic belief, some vampires were believed to have their skin removed and blown up by the devil as a blood-filled sack. In Northern Europe, the Naxaya was said to chew on its own extremities. Each community was grappling with the same unsettling reality. Bodies do strange things after death. Modern scholars like Paul Barber explained in his book, Vampires, Burial, and Death, that the terrifying signs villagers once took as proof of vampirism are in fact natural stages of decomposition. After death, microorganisms begin breaking down tissue. They release gases like methane and carbon dioxide. With nowhere to go, the gases bloat the body, stretching the skin tight and making the corpse look strangely well fed. That same pressure can also force dark fluids up through the nose and mouth, creating the impression of fresh blood. Blood itself can remain liquid long after death. In sudden deaths such as suicide, trauma, or electrocution, the heart stops abruptly. Oxygen levels drop, and clotting is incomplete. Later, as red blood cells break down, blood can appear to reliquefy. When a body is opened, it looks as though it has only just fed. Skin peeling away to reveal what looks like new skin is a process called skin slippage. The outer layer detaches, exposing moist tissue beneath. To the untrained eye, this raw flesh could look like fresh, healthy skin. A ruddy face, too, has a natural explanation. When a body lies face down, or is buried that way, as we explored earlier, gravity pulls blood to the front of the body, staining the skin with a flushed, lifelike color. And the old rumor of hair and nails growing after death? They don't. What really happens is the skin dehydrates and shrinks, making nails and stubble appear longer. Sometimes nails even fall away, exposing the nail bed beneath, which looks like a new nail has grown. The people of the past had no way of knowing these processes. They couldn't observe decomposition under controlled conditions, and every burial was shaped by unique factors: soil, coffin, cause of death, season. To them, these strange and unsettling changes were not biology. They were proof of something sinister, and it was from this gap in knowledge that the vampire was born. And yet the fear of the vampire didn't fade with the seasons. Folkloric vampire sightings were reported well into the 1800s, and in some rural parts of Eastern Europe, even into the early 20th century. In other words, the vampire is not ancient history. It's practically modern. It was never just a monster. It was a reflection of fear. The fear of death, of disease, of the unknown changes that happen to the body after life ends. Communities tried to explain what they saw, and in doing so, they gave us the vampire, bloated, ruddy, restless. But notice what stood against it: garlic, hawthorn, and poppy seeds, plants of vitality, fertility, and protection. In the struggle between life and death, it was the green world that guarded the living. This episode begins with an account of suicide. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please know you are not alone. In the US, you can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline to connect with support right away. If you do not have access to a phone, you can also search 988 through your web browser, click the chat button, and be connected to a counselor online. If you are listening elsewhere, please look up the local hotline in your country. Reaching out for help is always the right step. Much of the research for this episode comes from Paul Barber's book, Vampires, Burial, and Death. If you've enjoyed learning about the vampires of folklore, I highly recommend this book. It's full of case studies, historical reports, and scientific explanations that I could only give you a glimpse of. If you hear any echoes of your own, questions, reflections, or stories, send them my way at botanicalechoes@gmail.com. Thank you for joining me on Botanical Echoes. Until next time, may the stories you carry root you in wonder, and may the plants around you continue to keep watch.